Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this 12th session of the uh, Research Methodology Workshop of the Indian Society of Nephrology. I request Professor Narayan Prasad to introduce today's speaker from the UK, Professor Jonathan Barrett. So Narayan Prasad, please take over and do the needful.
At the outset, I would like to thank Professor Raja Purkar sir for taking the responsibility for conducting such a great research methodology workshop, and he has dedicated himself for last 3 months for this research workshop. So on behalf of Indian Society of Nephrology, I would like to thank him first. And it is my responsibility today to introduce our great friend, great researcher, Professor Jonathan Barrett. So actually you will seldom see such a great researcher, such a great physician. He has many feathers in his hat. You can see he is the Mayor Professor of Renal Medicine, Department of Cardiovascular Science, Honorary Consultant Nephrologist, John Wall Renal Unit, Leicester General Hospital, Head of the Postgraduate Specialty School of Clinical Academic Training, Health Education, East Midlands. On the front of the teaching and training, he personally supervised a 20-strong laboratory and clinical research team, comprising four postdoctoral scientists, a non-clinical lecturer, an NHR clinical lecturer, many academic clinical fellows, 2 technicians, 4 PhD students, 6 research nurses, 5 research associates. So teaching and training is a great and important part through which you contribute to the academics of any institution, and for the well-being of the human beings, well-being of any clinical works. That teaching and training improves your clinical care of the patients, also improves simultaneously. And that you will see from Dr. John. The most important thing on his biography, you can see he has displayed all his research groups photographs here. So that's I'm trying to show you today. One very important thing what you can see here in this multiple themes, one topic, that is IgA nephropathy throughout, and multiple fellows, multiple PhD students, multiple fellows, multiple DMS students or MDA students are working on this. And behind all the work themes, one single man is there, that is Jonathan Barrett. Beyond teaching, training and research, he is an at-par clinician that I know. He is a great author. He has 20 review articles, invited review articles in almost all top journals of the nephrology. 21 book chapters, 1 book, multiple original research articles that have been published that is on his name. Along with that, one of the most important thing, he is also in the media. And one of the very important character of any researcher is to generate fund for the research. And that capability you will seldom see, and that is there in Jonathan Barrett. So now I would, with this much of the introduction, I cannot finish his introduction in a daytime. So it is over to you, John, and you can start your presentation.
Thanks very much, Nari. I don't know whether I can live up to that. So it is I'm just going to make sure that let Let me just make sure the technology is working. Can everyone see the slides?
They share now. Yeah.
Yep, you can see it. So Narayan and Mohan, thank you very much for inviting me. It is an absolute honor to be able to talk at this inaugural series of seminars, which I think is an absolutely fantastic idea, bearing in mind the restrictions we have on COVID and the opportunities you're offering your fellows in India to get some real high quality training in academic methodology. I think I've looked at the program and I think it's been, I think it covers all the important aspects. So I congratulate you all on delivering such a great program. So I've been tasked with thinking about how you progress in academic nephrology. And this is me. And you've already heard I'm a professor of renal medicine in Leicester, and I do clinical work at the John Walls Renal Unit in Leicester. And this is my disclaimer slide. I want to convince every fellow on this call that being an academic and a nephrologist is by far the best job in the world. There is no better job. I love my job. I have enjoyed it since I started training in nephrology. And I think it's a real privilege to be able to combine research and academic work with being a clinical nephrologist. I hope by the end of this talk, you're convinced as well, and that you're wanting to try, dip your toe into the research world and see whether this could be something that could be part of your life for the next many years of your clinical work. And so what do I do? Well, I lead the renal research group in the College of Life Sciences in the University of Leicester. And that encompasses both my own group, but a range of other renal research groups, which I'll touch upon in a minute. But this spans basic scientists, clinicians, nurses, physiotherapists, qualitative researchers. So a full range of different people with different skills from different disciplines. And of course, we interact with other medical specialties. And that's one of the things that academic nephrology gives you the opportunity to do, is to meet people you wouldn't ordinarily meet, to have discussions and debates about how the best way is to look after patients with kidney disease. As you've heard, my research is very focused on a bench to bedside approach to IgA nephropathy. And in the UK, IgA nephropathy is a rare disease, but in India, from my understanding and working with Sasina Alexander, it is a far more common disease and far more aggressive and far more likely to put patients onto dialysis. But I lead the RADAR group in the UK, and I'm also a member of the International IgA Nephropathy Steering Group. And what that means is I get to have an opportunity to interact with multiple collaborators, partners, and friends across the world in the study of IgA. And as you can see here, I'm meeting with nephrologists and interested GN, doctors from Singapore, from Malaysia, from Thailand, and from the Philippines. And so one thing that developing an interest in being an academic nephrologist does is it gives you an opportunity to develop wide networks across countries to promote research and to deliver research. And the other thing which I think is at the center of every clinical nephrologist's focus and every academic nephrologist's focus are our patients. And so we work very, very closely with our patients in the UK and abroad to understand what's important to them so they can set research questions for us to study. And I think, fundamentally, our job is to make our patients' lives better by improving their quality of life and by providing new treatments. And it's an incredibly exciting job as an academic to contribute to that increase in knowledge and potentially the new treatments and therapies that can become available for our patients that make their lives better. And to do that, I work very closely with pharmaceutical companies, because ultimately they are the institutions that will deliver us new drugs. And that has afforded me new opportunities to start thinking about how we get drugs to our patients. I used to assume that they just appeared from pharmacy, but actually there's a massive industry behind there, from basic clinical science through to the regulatory aspects of how we get a drug approved, through to actually the delivery of those drugs and affordability. And so while I never set out when I was a trainee to start thinking about working with the drug regulators such as the FDA and the European Medicines Agency, what being involved and developing a career in academic nephrology has meant is that I've had those opportunities to work with these regulators to get at the very highest level to influence policy and to influence how we test and define whether a drug works in kidney disease. And that's an incredibly exciting opportunity that I think people on the call need to think about, because when I was at your stage, this didn't even cross my mind, but these are the kind of opportunities that can open up if you develop a career based around research and kidney disease. And as part of that, I've been part of the KDIGO group, which is rewriting the international guidelines on glomerular disease, and I've been tasked with leading the IgA nephropathy group. And so here, as a nephrologist in Leicester, I'm influencing the management of IgA nephropathy on a global scale by contributing to writing the international guidelines. And again, as a trainee, some 20 plus years ago, that was never on my radar. But these are the kind of opportunities that can develop over time as you develop your research career. And so what I do is I take basic laboratory findings we see here, we publish those, disseminate those, and actually influence drug development. And as an example, this paper here, in terms of Adam TS, which has just been published, has meant we've been able to influence a drug company to repurpose a drug they were developing for arthritis for a drug for kidney disease. And that's incredibly important in thinking how we get new drugs to our patients. And that's the opportunities that you will have if you develop an academic interest. But at the same time, my work with patients has meant that we've been starting to be involved in asking patients what's important to them. If you're involved in clinical trials of new therapies, it means you get access to drugs much more quickly than you would have done otherwise. And here you can see the first paper that's been published in kidney disease on the use of blocking the lectin pathway of complement activation and its effectiveness. And what this means for my patients in Leicester and what it could mean for your patients in India is if you're involved in clinical research, your patients get access to these drugs first. They get access to the world-leading, cutting-edge therapeutics that are potentially going to impact on our patients' lives. And I know there are a number, certainly for IgA nephropathy, there are a number of studies that will be opening up in India. And that's an opportunity for you to be involved if those studies are happening at your hospitals, in playing a part in a way in the furthering knowledge of IgA treatment and bringing new drugs to the market. And here you can see the paper from the phase 2 study that I was involved with, and this could potentially be the first approvable drug for IgA nephropathy in the world. And so it gets very exciting the closer you get to the end point of getting new therapies for your patients. And everyone on this call can play a part in that if you are able to help with recruiting patients to clinical studies. Everyone can play a part in their own way. And here you can see the paper that came out that really redefined how we decide what's important to measure in deciding whether a new drug works in IgA nephropathy. And again, this was something I never envisaged as a trainee that I would be part of, because I was interested in laboratory science. But actually, this is how an academic career can evolve over time and have multiple facets to it. And that's why I think it's such an exciting career. And so what I'm going to do is talk to you for, I think, 20 minutes or so. But what I really want is the opportunity to chat to the trainees on the call and answer any questions that you might have. I'm sure my email can be distributed if people want to ask questions after this, if you're interested in developing an academic career. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how I developed my career and the things I learned along the way. So like all of you on the call, I went to medical school, and I went to medical school in Manchester in the late 80s, 90s. So it's too long ago to remember. And even at that point, I realized I was interested in research. And so I took an extra year and did a BSc in physiology and pharmacology, and really realized that it was laboratory aspects of research that interest me. And I think this really highlighted to me the importance of understanding the range of research available and how that fits with your own personality. And so I would task everyone on the call to have a think about what they enjoy, what aspects of their job they enjoy, and what their natural preference is in terms of research. So you can be a laboratory researcher. It takes a certain skill set and a certain mentality to be able to enjoy working in a lab. One of the commonest things clinicians say to me when they work in the lab is, where are all the patients? Because you can work with kidney cells and animals, and you may not see a patient for a year. And that's some things that people enjoy, but other clinicians really miss the contact with patients. So it's not for everyone. And this is something that you need to think about yourself. Here we've got Matt Brown, who is doing research, clinical research, and he's doing research with patients all the time. And he's interested in actually looking at the cardiovascular complications of chronic kidney disease using imaging. And it may be that you're more suited, or you would enjoy more a clinical research career, looking at the physiology and pathology of disease in patients. Matt never goes anywhere near the lab, but he knows that he can send me samples and we can analyze them for him, but that's not what he's interested in. And that's great, and he's very successful at doing that. James Burton here is one of my colleague professors, and he's interested in how we deliver dialysis effectively. So he's got a number of studies running where he's looking at different ways of dialysing people overnight, different durations of dialysis, and how that might impact on quality of life and cardiovascular health. Again, he goes nowhere near the laboratory. He does his work very much on a clinical basis with clinical trials, and he's very successful. But it's a different way of delivering research that really suits him, because he tried the lab and he didn't enjoy it. So again, I come back to the fact there are lots of different ways of doing research, and it's about finding the one that suits you. You may be very much a numbers orientated person who likes dealing with spreadsheets, likes dealing with statistics. And so you may be interested in big data. And this is Rupert Major, one of my other lecturers, who's not looked at a patient, not been in a lab, but has dealt with a large amount of data from primary care, looking at rates of progression and risk factors for progression in the Leicester population. And so his training and his career is very much based around statistics and dealing with large data. And again, that's a different way of delivering research. And then we have Hannah here, who's done a very qualitative research study looking at the patient's experiences of receiving dialysis, which again is completely removed from laboratory or clinical research, but is a very, very important part of our research portfolio. And so don't think if you want to be a researcher, every researcher looks the same and does the same and needs the same skills. And I would say to all the young nephrologists on the call, have a think to yourself about what you enjoy doing. You may be really interested in data, and that would be where you might want to develop your career. You may be really interested in devices and technology, and it may be that you want to look at different ways of delivering dialysis, different ways of measuring changes in the blood, or it may be that you're interested in the clinical aspects or the more basic biochemical access. There's no right answer. Everything has to be individualized to the person, and I would ask you to go away and think about what might be right for you. So after I finished medical school, like all of you, I was a house officer and an SHO, and I negotiated the exams, which for me was the MRCP. But I was doing a renal job, and the nephrologist I was working with, Mike Venning, asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to be a nephrologist, and I wanted to do research, and I was really interested in lab research. And it just so happened that a couple of weeks prior to that conversation, he'd been at a meeting, and he'd been chatting to a nephrologist from Leicester, who was actually mentioning that they were looking for someone to do some research. And that person was John Feely. Now, many of you may know John because he's now very famous. He was president of the ISN. He's edited the Comprehensive Nephrology textbook, and has been a world leader in kidney disease research. I'd never heard of him when I was introduced to him. And what's more, when they told me he was interested in IgA nephropathy, I really didn't know much more about that either, apart from what I needed to know to pass the MRCP. But what I did know, that this was an opportunity that I shouldn't miss out on. So I went down and chatted to him. I went down and met him. I talked about what his vision was for how he wanted to do research, and he grilled me about what was important to me and what I wanted to do. And over the course of 6 to 9 months, we generated a proposal, and I was fortunate enough to get an MRC clinical training fellowship. And that meant I moved down from Manchester to Leicester, and here you can see Leicester General Hospital, which is where I do my clinical work, and the university where I do my lab research. And this is a very important point I want to bring up really for all of you trainees, is a lot of what happens to us in our career is by chance. Every clinical academic I talk to, this has been the case. They've had an opportunity given to them, which they've decided to take. And it's nothing that they've planned. No one has gone with a roadmap to say at 12 months I'm going to be here, at 24 months I'm going to be here, at 36 months I'll be somewhere else. Things happen in academia, and I think to be a good academic, and I think to be a good clinical doctor, you need to spot opportunities and you need to be able to think about taking them. I could quite easily have decided not to go down to Leicester because I preferred to stay in Manchester. Mike Venning may not have met John Feely, and the list goes on. And so I think as an academic, being flexible, being able to spot opportunities, and being able to think about taking those are really key skills that I would recommend. And don't worry that if your roadmap is not going exactly to plan, because opportunities will appear. And I think you just need to be able to think about those and grasp them when they come along. The other thing that I want to bring up, and I think is absolutely critical if you want to develop a clinical academic career, is to find a good academic mentor. And that mentor is someone who's genuinely interested in you and your best interests, who's got the time to devote to your development, and will give you honest advice whether you want to hear it or not. And I think that is really key, because John has done all of those things for me. He spent time helping me develop my writing skills. He spent time helping me develop my presentation skills. He was around so that I could contact him and talk to him, and he always had my best interests at heart. And I think, and another thing I'm going to task all the trainees on the call to do is to think about who that might be for you. Who might you come across, who might you know already that could be that for you, that could give you that help and advice? Or who is it that you don't have at the moment that you want to you want to have the opportunity to meet to and talk to see whether you can develop that relationship? And importantly, they don't have to be the top professor or clinical director. So when I first met John, John was an NHS consultant doing research in his spare time. He wasn't a professor. He wasn't world known. He went on to become those things. But actually what he was an interested person, interested in me with the time to help me develop. And that's the person you're looking for. The top professor is likely to be more likely, or used to be more likely, in the air, flying between countries than at your unit having the time to help you. That isn't always the case, but I think don't be obsessed by getting the leading professor to be the person. Find someone who is genuinely interested in helping you develop. They don't have to work in the same place. I'm sat here in Leicester, you're sat in a variety of places in India, and we're having this conversation now. I mentor trainees on the telephone and by Skype. And so you don't have to be in the same place to be able to mentor someone. And it doesn't have to just be one person. So please, one of the things, as I've said, is think about what type of research you would like to develop, skills you'd like to develop in the type of research you want to do, and start thinking about who your academic mentors might be, who can help you along that process. And these are some of mine, and this is at my inaugural lecture when I got my chair, and you can see John Feely is still there. He's been helping and supporting me for the last 20 years. Professor Kevin Harris here, who's been helping again and providing impartial advice. Graham Warwick, who's an NHS consultant, who's always been a great sounding board for clinical issues, and a non-clinical scientist, Professor Alice Smith, who really helped teach me how to use a pipette and how to grow kidney cells when I first started as my PhD. And so you need to develop a team around you that are going to help and support you, that bring different skills to the mix. And so I did my PhD. I started my PhD. I started growing kidney cells. These are mesangial cells. You can see these mesangial cells laying down matrix here. And I was looking at expression of receptors. I was invincible. Like all of you young trainees at the moment, I knew where I was going. I was focused. I was hardworking, still am. And I felt invincible. I was in my early 30s, late 20s. Everything was going well. And then this happened, and I developed acute myeloid leukemia in my PhD. And that took me out of action for a year. I had chemotherapy, multiple courses, I couldn't go to work. And what it did for me, and I think this is really important, if you take anything away from this talk, this is the most important thing. It made me reassess my priorities and how I was going to live my life going forward. And for all of you starting out on your career, it is really, really important you get the balance between work and life right. That you look after your own health, that you look after your own physical and mental health, and that you maintain your family and friends. So this is my family. When I was diagnosed with leukemia, my wife was pregnant with Alfie, and he's going to be 21 on Monday. And so a long time has passed, but I would really emphasize to all of you, whether you go into academic work or into clinical and academic work, that you get this balance right. Look after your family, look after your friends, maintain hobbies to keep your health and to keep essentially your sanity as you go through your career. So for me, it's rugby and it's football and music. It doesn't matter what it is, but keep your hobbies, keep your interests to get that work-life balance right. Because for me, the most successful people I come across have got that balance right. And if you get your home life, you get the life out of work wrong, it will invariably impact on your success and your ability to deliver high quality care to your patients and high quality research. So please always think about that when you're making the decisions and thinking about how your career is progressing. And so I got my PhD, came back, got my PhD, then I was fortunate enough to get a clinician scientist award, which allowed me 5 years worth of funding to carry on my research. And for those of you who are starting to think about developing your research programs, or perhaps in research already, this was the first time that I'd been given a pot of money where I could employ someone. And I employed Karen Molyneux, and she's worked with me now for the last 20 years. But this was a very strange thing. And if you start on an academic career and you're applying and you're getting grants and you're starting to employ people, that's very unusual. Certainly for me in the NHS, I work in the NHS or for the university, but I don't actually employ anyone. I don't have the responsibility of that because I turn up to work, I have a salary, and I've never had any training in how to manage staff, how to look after people. And my teams have grown to include a range, as I've said, of different professions and disciplines, people at different stages in their career. And as you can imagine, by employing those people, it brings a responsibility to be able to look after them properly. And essentially the way I see this, if you do go into academia, then you almost start developing a small business. And you need the skills to be able to manage that, to be able to manage how you deal with the budget, to be able to manage how you deal with HR issues, to be able to manage how you have a vision for how you're going to go forward. And all of these things are things that certainly in the UK, we're not taught at all at medical school or in our postgraduate training. We're taught how to manage ANCA-associated vasculitis, but we're not taught how to manage a business, how to manage a team, how to think about how we develop that going forwards. And this is where I think another thing that is really important for all the young trainees is to take opportunities to develop leadership skills, to develop the skills to be able to think about strategy and vision, to think about teamwork and motivation. Because for me in my role now, that is far more important than designing an experiment where I expose proximal tubular cells to IgA. My role has developed where I'm now looking at more, how do I lead the team? How do I agree a direction? How do I manage challenges that come up rather than the nuances of an experiment? And so if you get opportunities as trainees, rather like this fantastic course where you're getting good research skills training, think about how you might in parallel develop these other skills so that if you develop a career and you're successful and you're employing people, you can get the best out of the team that you work with. And so in the UK, this has been recognised very heavily, and now all trainees who are postdoctoral, who are wanting to develop an academic career, get specific leadership training, leadership support and development. And I think this is really, really important and is probably the thing that the academic trainees find the most useful, is being taught, how do you manage this developing team? And this is not to blow my own trumpet, but I just want to give you an idea. So in the last 5 years, I've had to manage a budget of £7 million. I've been directly responsible for the salaries of 12 of my staff. I'm working on 6 different commercial contracts with 6 different companies, all with different timelines, and I'm supervising 5 PhD students. And all of that requires a lot of time spent doing this aspect of my work rather than planning experiments. And so developing these skills as you go through your training is really, really key, because it doesn't come naturally. And there are lots of ways of handling this. And of course, the other thing is, that's great. In the last 5 years, I've managed to generate that income and deliver this, but I've got to do the same again in the next 5 years. So I've got to be thinking ahead, because that money will run out. And how am I going to carry on supporting these salaries? How am I going to carry on working with industry when I have no money? And so this is something as an academic that will always be on your mind. Your success in terms of guaranteeing funding, but then you need to think ahead and be planning ahead as to how do you generate the next tranche of money to be able to continue and develop your research forward. And this, I think, is another key skill that academics need to have. They need to be resilient. And the thing I tell all of my trainees is, if you're going to be an academic, you need to deal with rejection. And you need to, and that comes from having grants rejected, having papers rejected. And here, having all that hard work of planning an experiment or a clinical trial or a clinical study, and then finding it doesn't give you the answer you were expecting. And I guarantee you, every clinical academic out there has faced this throughout their career. And it still hurts. You know, I put together a grant, I put a paper, I think it's probably the best piece of work I've ever done, and it gets rejected, or it gets sent back and they want it corrected. And it still makes you feel, you know, a little bit upset, but you've got to get through that, because as an academic, this will be part of your life. And you need to develop strategies to be able to deal with that. And it's not you, everyone goes through this process. So normally I would ask people to say, which pile of these papers are my successful grants and publications, and which pile is my unsuccessful? And this is my unsuccessful publications and grants, or papers that were rejected that needed to be resubmitted. And this is the successes. And this is the same for all people in this area. You just have to get used to the fact that you're going to get a hit rate of 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 when you're submitting something. And you've got to learn to develop the techniques not to take that personally. And so coming towards where I am now, I became a chair in nephrology at the University of Leicester. And this slide really is here to show you the people that have helped me along the way. And it's not just me, it is a team of people that help you in your academic career. and I would really emphasize to the young trainees, is to start thinking about how you develop that team of support, that support network, those collaborations, those colleagues are going to support, who are going to help you as you progress your career, and who you are going to help as they progress their career. And so you can see my mentors, you can see the clinicians and researchers I work with, my family, the lab team that I have now in Leicester, and perhaps most importantly of all, because remember, we're clinical academics whose raison d'etre is to make the lives of our patients better. And these are 4 patients that came along with IgA nephropathy that have helped me in my research in various ways over the years. And I think as trainees, I think it really is important to remember that at the center of everything you do are the patients. And you need to engage with the patients. You need to explain to the patients why you're doing what you're doing, and explain to them why your research is important. And you can see here, we run regular patient information days across the UK, talking to our patients with IgA nephropathy. We've opened up our laboratories so patients can see how the samples they give us are used in research, and the researchers can hear from patients, because all the people here are not medically qualified, so have never really met a patient with IgA nephropathy, yet have spent years studying it. So engaging with your patients is incredibly important. And just as an example, we stream all of our patient information through Facebook. And actually, this is something I have no skill in, but we decided we'd look at what patients talk about. So we looked about what patients talk about on social media, and we identified themes that were important to them. And we ran focus groups. And one of the things that came out, and I don't know whether this is true in India, but one of the major problems patients have with IgA nephropathy is pain in the kidney area. And it is almost uniformly discounted by nephrologists, because the widely held view is kidneys don't cause pain, but it is a real issue for them. Intermittent pain, often in association with infections. And this came through talking to patients face to face, looking at the posts on the Facebook page. And that set a research priority for us. We're not pain experts. This is something we've never done before. But actually it got us thinking, this is something we really ought to look at, because that's what patients are telling us. And so we've now secured funding to do a research project to follow patients when they're well and when they're in pain, to scan their kidneys to work out 3-dimensional volume, to look at biomarkers in the blood and urine of inflammation, and to see really whether this is a true thing that is coming from the kidneys. And this was all driven by talking to our patients. And I would recommend that as you start in your career as researchers and you're developing your academic interests, is talk to your patients, find out what's important to them, because they will be incredibly strong advocates for you. In the UK, we can talk to MPs and politicians till we're blue in the face, and they won't listen. I guarantee you, if I get 2 or 3 patients saying this is important to them, the political agenda suddenly changes. And so they can be an incredibly powerful voice for your research area. They're also incredibly motivated to raise money for your research. And as Nariam mentioned, I have a significant donation from a patient with IgA nephropathy, and that supported a lot of my laboratory work. And so they are there. They can support you by providing you with blood and urine, by enrolling in clinical trials. They can support you by donating money. They can support you by advocating for your particular disease area. And they can give you new research ideas that perhaps you hadn't thought about. So as you're developing your career, please keep patients at the center of everything that you do. And it's even led to the fact that we now have a YouTube page. So if any of you out there want to have a look, this is a YouTube page of all our patient days, talking to patients, talking to researchers in my lab. And here we are filming, because here what we're doing is we're answering the questions that patients posed through the Facebook page in terms of the questions they don't know the answers to. And this was a grant that was funded through Kidney Research UK. So again, I've started off as a basic laboratory scientist, and I've moved through through a variety of different routes, to doing research on Facebook and to filming videos and assessing whether they work. So it gives you an idea of the variety of opportunities that you can have that can take you in different directions. But what I want to stress is the importance of keeping patients at everything you do from the very beginning of your research career. And so I hope I've convinced you that academic research in nephrology is useful, is exciting, and incredibly rewarding. So how might you get started on that path? Well, what I tell my trainees is, why not get involved in a clinical study? Why not find out what's happening in your hospital? Go and see the principal investigator and say, can I help? It might be enrolling patients, it might be collecting samples, it could be analysing some data that's sat on the investigator's desk. But why don't you start out by finding out what's going on in your local hospital, find out whether you can help, find out if there are any clinical trials running. So all the trainees in my unit are sub-investigators on clinical trials. They don't have a great responsibility, but they can help out by recruiting patients, by identifying patients, by doing a study visit. And it gives you an opportunity then to see how clinical research works. It's not very time consuming, but it does give you an opportunity to see whether the research is something that you enjoy and want to consider. There may be data in your unit that you could put together as a case series. And so here you can see that Chike has put together a case series of the patients we've had with IgA vasculitis, a single center cohort study. And what this does is it gives you an opportunity to collect data, to analyze data, to use the skills you'll have learnt on this workshop, and to produce a piece of work that you can then present at a meeting. And here this was presented at the ASN meeting, but it can be a local meeting, it can be a national meeting, or it can be an international meeting. But it gives you an opportunity to present some work and to get an experience of how data analysis can move into a piece of scientific publication. And everyone in their hospital will have opportunities to look at particular aspects of renal disease that they could put together with the support of someone in the hospital, an academic mentor, and start developing this as a way of testing out whether they enjoy academic work, but also publicizing their skills. And here you can see members of my team stood in front of a poster at the ASN. And what I would say is, presenting your work is a great opportunity to allow you to network, to meet new investigators, and to start developing links with people that you might want to work with in the future. And it gives a focal point around where you can talk about what you've done and the skills you have, and that gives you an opportunity to introduce yourself to other groups, either in India or more globally. The other thing I suggest to trainees wanting to start out on a career is, let's see if there's any interesting cases that we could write up. And so Steve wrote up this case here, the case of orofacial digital syndrome type 1. But there will undoubtedly be unusual and interesting cases that every hospital and every renal unit will come across. It's about thinking about whether that could be written up for as a case report. It's a great opportunity to learn how to scientifically write. It's a great opportunity how you put a paper together. And it doesn't have to be long, but it gives you an opportunity to start testing those skills, analytical skills and writing skills that are key to being an academic. And then, of course, if you've done the work to get a case series together, you might want to publish that if it's of sufficient interest. And this is something I did while I was doing my PhD, was to look at the outcome of acute renal failure in those patients who had a ruptured aneurysm in Leicester. All the data was there. It involved going through the notes, but again, it was a great opportunity to learn how to put a paper together. It's not intuitive. I don't know whether you've been taught at medical school. I certainly wasn't, how to write a scientific paper. And it's not straightforward, and it takes multiple iterations to get it right, but it's a great skill to start out with in terms of putting something together, perhaps something simple like a case report, and then something a bit more complicated like a case series. And those are great ways to get into the academic arena and to start out on your academic career, and can be done while you're doing your clinical training. You don't need to do a research post to do this. It's easier if you've got dedicated time, but most of these things were done while people were doing their clinical training. If you really want to take things further forward, then you need to start doing your homework. You need to start thinking about the style of research you want to be involved with, the disease area. Is it glomerular disease? Is it dialysis? Is it transplantation? You need to start thinking about where you want to do that research. Is it in India? Is it out of India? And you need to be really thinking through those and talking to academic mentors, talking to other trainees who've had similar experiences. Because networking, I think, is a critical skill to being a successful academic. And meetings are a great opportunity to do that. Now we're in a COVID era, but let's assume we're back to normal. Getting yourself to a meeting, I suggest one of the best advice I received was set yourself agenda. Set yourself who the people are that you want to meet at that meeting. Who are the key people you want to talk to, introduce yourself to, and try and start developing a relationship to develop your research or academic career. Make a list, work out where they're presenting, work out where their team have posters, and make sure that you have a timetable that means you go and meet with them. So you go to the session, at the end of that session you find them and introduce yourself because you know that's where they're going to be, and you have a clear plan about what you want to get out of that meeting so that you can make the contacts that you need to make. Of course, we're now in an era where we can't do that, and so email is always an option. But I think the most important thing is don't write an email that just says, "Hi, my name is Joe Bloggs. I'd really like to come and work with you." Because we get lots and lots of those, and quite frankly, they get turned around pretty quickly. So do some research. Say why you're interested in, for instance, my research, what you want to get out of anything in terms of developing a career, what your interests are in clinical and laboratory research. Make sure that you're prepared either for an email or for an interaction at a meeting. Don't just come along and say, "Hi, I'm Joe Bloggs. I really like your work. Can I work with you?" Because you need to be putting a little bit more thought into what you want to get out of that. And these interactions, these chance interactions, can work if you want them to. So I would imagine many of you may well know Cecina, who's a consultant in CMC for law, and she's doing her PhD, and she's doing her PhD with myself in Leicester and with Mo Daha in Leiden. And she contacted us and contacted myself and John Feely to say, "Look, I've got this idea. I want to develop an IGA cohort in India. There's nothing known really about IGA in India. Could we work together?" She developed a proposal. She's been over to Leicester for 6 months to learn techniques, and her cohort, the Grace cohort, is going exceptionally well. And that was all by having the nerve and having the desire to make contact with people she'd never met before. I'd never met Cecina. We put the application in, we spoke over the telephone, and we finally met actually when the study had started. So that was a way of doing things without actually having to be in the same room. But it can work, and Cecina is a great success story who's going to probably has generated the best cohort of IGA patients in India, and will have fantastic opportunities to research that. And that came about by just being able to contact people and having a very clear focus about what she wanted to achieve. And that happens across the globe. So if you think about my lab, which is no different to any other lab, we have Masahiro here, who came over to work with me from Japan because his boss, Yusuke, and I are good friends, and he asked me, and we put together a proposal. Dina came and chatted to me at a GN training course in Singapore. She's from Indonesia. We developed a proposal, and she's come over and she's now got a PhD and is back in Indonesia. Fatah is from Iraq. You have Yahya and Mohammed here from Saudi Arabia and Libya, and they all contacted me by email, and we developed a proposal. We found out, we had telephone calls, we found out what the priorities were, what they wanted to achieve, and we found there was a good fit, and then we moved things forward. And that's the same story up and down research groups across the globe. So don't be afraid of contacting people, but be very clear about what you want to get out of that contact. And here's Si Cheng from Singapore, who came and did his MD with me. And him and Adrian, his boss, simply caught me at the ISN meeting and said, could we have a chat? And things moved on from there. So don't be afraid of taking opportunities, but be really focused about what it is you want to achieve with that. And the other thing, and I know Vivek spoke to you last week, is the ISN is a fantastic organization for facilitating this, both through its sister centers and through its fellowships. And so here's the lab team out for afternoon tea, as we do in England. And this is Su Fang and this is Xu. Both of those are ISN fellows that funded them to come over to the lab for 12 months to do research and get some clinical exposure. And Su Fang is from Peking University in Beijing. And this all came about because I went to a sister center and talked at their sister center meeting in Beijing. And we developed a relationship with Hong Zhang, who's the lead investigator there. And we put together a fellowship. Leicester has a sister center with Nantong, and that's where I met Xu, and we put together a fellowship, and she came over to Leicester. And that's the same for all sites across the world in terms of being able to support these kind of opportunities. And then over the last couple of years, I've had fantastic experiences at 2 really high quality meetings in India. The first in Hyderabad, which is a sister center with a hospital in Birmingham, where we talked about glomerular disease. And the second in Lucknow, where we again had a CME on glomerular disease. And these are ideal opportunities, if glomerular disease is your thing, to come along to have a strategy about making sure you speak to people that you're interested in working with, and start to develop how you might develop a proposal to do some research or some academic work. And I would really strongly advise you to start thinking in that way about meetings and how you might be able to use those to network in a very, very clear way, and what you want to get out of those interactions. And so I come back to this. Nephrology is clearly the best specialty in the world. There's absolutely no doubt. And being an academic nephrologist is really the best of both worlds. It gives you the opportunity to improve the lives of your patients in a way that is just not possible otherwise. And so I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions. I'm not sure how we do questions, whether it's through the question bar or whether someone is going to chair that, Narayan.
Yeah, John, this was a mesmerizing academic journey, and I think everyone listening, you must be mesmerized with your achievements, your balance between your academic activity, balance between family members, about your health. Then you have taken care of your family, friends, and then you have developed a leadership quality. That is something which is required in a great researcher, so that you can lead a team, and that is wonderful. And I think you have given so many tips. One of the important thing was choosing the mentorship. So you are a John, you have got a great John Fiali as a mentor, and he had time to devote with you and guide you through this excellent journey throughout. So what do you suggest, what 2 important things one should see in his mentor?
So I think they've got to have your best interests at heart. And so I had many conversations with John where I thought I'd come up with a really great idea. And John said, no, that's not really a great idea. And so I think they've got to be able to give you honest advice. They've got to have your best interests at heart. And they've got to have the time to devote to you. Because it's really difficult if someone isn't around or doesn't really have the time to devote. So I give you an example. My first papers I put together, it was in the days with email wasn't really around that much. I would send him a printed copy of my paper, and it would come back, and I perhaps had kept 5 words, and he'd red penned it, like at school. And that, and that was how involved he was in helping me develop, because I So when I look at what I used to write back when I was a PhD student and what I write now, you wouldn't tell it was written by the same person. And so you need someone who's prepared to do that. Whenever I had a presentation, we would spend at least half a day going through that presentation and getting it right, word for word, slide for slide. And so that's the kind of way that you get that mentorship and that time, and you learn from that in terms of developing. And clearly the amount of input gets less as you develop, but I think you need someone who's able to do that. And I think with modern technology, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone in your same institution. We're talking now many thousands of miles apart. And I would say it's not as good as being in Lucknow at your CME.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to have very nice food today. It'll probably be something English. But you know, that experience of meeting people, while we're going to miss out on that, we can still do things by Zoom. We can still do things by telephone. And there are opportunities to really support someone. But I think you need someone who's genuinely interested in you, rather what you can do for them. And it doesn't just have to be one person, Narayan.
Yeah. One of our delegates from our audience wants to know if anyone wants to make you as a mentor, how to go about that.
So I guess you've got my email address. So
yeah.
just send, you know, clearly there are only 24 hours in the day and there are 78 participants on this call. So there are limitations, but you know, the first thing to say is there are fantastic mentors in India. You know, yeah. I've been to Hyderabad, I've been to Lucknow, you know, I meet Vivek a lot. And I meet lots of other very inspiring, very, very successful Indian nephrologists. And I think you don't always need to look away to find someone who is going to be great to mentor you. But by all means, anyone can contact me. That's absolutely fine. And I will give them the best advice I can. But it's not, and I come back to my slide, it's not always about going for the top person. It's about going for those person who has the skills to support you. And as I say, when John Feely started mentoring me, he was a clinical nephrologist who had a part-time, in his spare time, did a bit of research. And he wasn't the person that everyone knows now as a very, very successful global nephrology figure. So it doesn't have to be someone who's already a global figure to do the job right.
And Professor Mohan Rajapurkar wants to know that are there opportunities in UK right now?
So there's no opportunities anywhere at the moment with COVID. So I think we all have to accept that there is a limitation on that. But ISN fellowships are a fantastic opportunity. Yeah. You know, so Hyderabad has a link with Birmingham. I'm not sure. We have a link with China. There must be other sister center relationships, but there are also ISN fellowships. Yeah. Always the fundamental thing is money in terms of salary. It's never the fact that we don't have capacity to support trainees. And so all of those trainees I showed you that worked in my laboratory took a good 6 to 9 months to get things sorted ahead of them actually starting. So it's not an instant fix. There aren't magic pots of money that are available for people to go into. It does require work and commitment to identify funding streams. But there is an absolute will to have bright young nephrologists from India come to the UK to do research and clinical and academic training. So there's absolutely no resistance there at all, but we do need to sort out the mechanics of the funding.
Dr. Das wants to know, how do you do multitasking? Besides a great researcher, how you balance as an administrator?
I used to have a full set of hair, and now you can see slowly it's going. It is difficult. I mean, I've met you in Lucknow, and you're juggling many, many balls in the air at the same time in a very busy clinical service. And it is a skill you develop, and you learn to prioritize, and you learn to delegate. And so I think the key thing is, and that's where the team comes in. I mean, you will admit as much as I do, nothing happens without a team. You can't do anything without a team that work well together. So while I'm stood here talking about things, I'm stood as a representative of the Leicester team. So while my name is at the end of a paper or I'm doing a talk, I can only do that because of the work that has gone on around me. So I think one of the things about juggling is don't do it by yourself. Get a team together, learn when to delegate, learn when to develop others who can then lighten your load and develop at the same time. But undoubtedly, I had a great example from an occupational health doctor. If you think about your family and friends, you think about your hobbies and your health, and you think about your work, just think about those three things. Your family and friends are like an egg. If you throw that egg against the wall and you don't look after it, it's going to break and it's very difficult to get that back. Your health, if you don't look after your health, it's like an egg. You throw that against the wall, it's going to break. You're not, you can do irretrievable harm if you don't look after that. Work is a rubber ball. No matter where you throw it, it will always come back. There are always going to be patients. So you've got to look after the fragile things really carefully. And that comes down to prioritize. That's why I brought up the example of when I was ill, because it makes you realize how important it is to get the balance right. And so you've got to juggle, you've got to prioritize, but fundamentally there's certain things that you cannot give up and you mustn't neglect. And that's your family and your friends, your own health, and your hobbies. And so it is juggling, and you can't do everything. And the other thing I tell clinical academics is to learn to say the word no. Because there'll be people like you and me who are saying, I've got a great project for you, and I've got all this data you can analyze for me, but actually they're already working a lot. They need to be able to say in the nicest possible way that they can't do that because they've got to prioritize, and there are only 24 hours in a day. So it's a skill, it's a difficult one to develop, but I think learning to say no and making sure you've got your own internal priorities right are key.
One more questions. Our one of friend is Amit Langote. He is asking one questions to you that how can a clinical nephrologist working in a private healthcare setup get into clinical research?
So I think here, my advice would be you can make links with academic centers. You can see whether you can be involved in clinical studies in your patient population. And certainly in multiple countries, and I don't know the rules in India, but private healthcare can be sites recruiting to clinical studies.
Yes.
So you can be a site to recruit to one of the IGA studies, for instance. Yes. It doesn't have to be government-funded hospitals. And the other thing is, if you're not doing any research now, don't go from 0 to 10 studies in 6 months. Start off with a simple, easy study. It might be observational. It might be a low risk intervention, and start small. Start small and build up slowly. It's not a race. And I would suggest it's a great opportunity to get involved in a clinical study. So that's where I would see that happening. And then certainly in the US, some of these private healthcare facilities actually have a business model that runs partly on the clinical trial work they get in. So if it's successful and you enjoy it, you can actually work a business model around delivering clinical trials as part of your core business. Because of course, if you deliver a commercial clinical trial, you get paid for it. So that's an opportunity in a business sense, but I would say start small, start simple, and start slowly.
I think, John, you have covered each and every aspects of journey of an academician who traveled throughout many difficult pathways, and you have given the tips to all of us for how to take care of the difficulties coming in the way. You have also told us how you can engage the pharmaceuticals, how to go about the translational research, how you can choose your mentors, how you can keep your health, how can you keep your family intact, how can you balance your other activities, including your hobbies intact. So, and at the end, you have told us this is not the single person's job, it is the teamwork that works, and you know how to get the words from your team members. So that is the most important tips from you. And I think time is not permitting us to go beyond this. So thank you, John.
So
Thanks
thank
a
you.
lot from Indian Society of Nephrology for this your time.
It's been a pleasure. I just want to set every trainee on the call a job. And that is, the next time I'm invited over to India to give a talk, your job is to come and find me, if you're there, and say hello. Or if you're at ASN. So don't be afraid. Just so please, if you are at a meeting, come and say hello. You don't need to want anything from it, but come and say hello. We don't bite.
Thank you,
Narayan.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you from Indian Society of Nephrology side and from Professor Rajapurkar side, sir. He has taken a lot of pain in arranging all this research methodology workshop for Indian Society of Nephrology. Thank you, Rajapurkar sir. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, John, for this wonderful lecture. I personally thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was a learning experience for me. Thank you very much.